Welcome once again to Daily Life Connection, as we continue to explore who God is and what difference that makes in our lives. For the last several days, we've been looking at the God of grace. We're going to continue to do that. Today, I want to talk about grace is heaven's hug. Grace is heaven's embrace or hug. God is a God of grace, and He expresses that in hugging us. Of course, we see the ultimate picture of that in Luke chapter 15. Excuse me. When the Father runs to the Son, it says throws his arms around him and hugs him, embraces him. That is a beautiful picture of the grace of God. Grace is not accepting and embracing those who deserve it. Grace is embracing those who've broken your heart, those who've caused your life agony or pain or misery, those who have walked away from you and held you at arm's length, those who have slandered you, those who have done things that have wounded and hurt you. Grace is the hug for those people. Those people. That's God's grace. God doesn't wait for us to be worthy of His hug. He doesn't wait for us to measure up to certain standards or even get cleaned up. The prodigal son still had his rags, wearing his rags that stunk like pig pens, and the Father embraces him. That's the ultimate picture of God's grace. God the embracer, God the hugger, God who reaches out to us in whatever condition we are, the as is, where is embrace. He is willing to, and an embrace says, I love you, I appreciate you, I hold you close. And that's God's grace. God's grace says, to me, you are valuable. To me, you are loved. To me, you are mine. You are worthy of being close to me. All of those things are said in a hug, aren't they? And it just, to be hugged, we're told that newborn infants, if they're not touched, if they're not hugged, if they're not held, their whole physical being deteriorates and does not grow properly. And their emotional life can be hindered by that as well. We as human beings need God's embrace. We need His tender holding us close to Himself. So today it's a really simple one, but it's so powerful. God the hugger, God the one who embraces you and I. He never holds us off at arm's length and tells us what's wrong with us and tells us to shape up and tells us to become worthy. Because the reality is He knows we can't. We never will. In that story of Luke 15, the older brother thought he was worthy. I've done everything. Why didn't you give me a party? He thought he was worthy, but he was no more worthy of the Father's grace than the younger brother who had so messed up his life. The older brother had messed up his life with pride. The younger brother had messed up his life with rebellion and self-centeredness. But the Father pleaded with the older son to come into the party too. He wanted to hug him as well. And that is the picture of the grace of God. God is an embracer. He's a hugger. And not of the cleaned up, perfect, self-righteous sort of people, but for the messed up, the failures, the stinkers. That's who God embraces. And that is just such a great definition of the grace of God. Well, I just encourage you today, let Him hug you. Let Him hug you. Do you know, us letting God hug us is what faith is. Faith. Heaven embraces us. Faith simply surrenders to the hug. It says, go ahead and hug me. That's faith. And we've seen, and sometimes, when kids get to be a certain age, they don't want to be hugged in public. And you go to hug them and they kind of brace and push away. That's the opposite of faith, isn't it? Faith says, I'm just going to surrender to your hug. And rebellion says, no, don't hug me. Anyway, grace, God, the hugger. Let's think about it today, and we'll talk again tomorrow. God bless.